I always had suspicions about pharmaceutical industries and never a big fan of politicians. But in many cases, that's grown from slight mistrust to contempt. For me, I would feel I was acting unethically to recruit people into those vaccine trials. Lack of transparency of government decision-making is a fundamental reason for the lack of trust.
So the person who's telling us to take the vaccine is receiving mass funding from the vaccine company who are making billions off of the vaccine.
To simplify it, yes, that's true. 90% of people that were making decisions in the FDA later went on to work in the...
For Big Pharma.
Related industry.
It looks like a club.
Yeah,
that's how it looks.
It's called the revolving door, and it's not a good look. They were often put on what we call end-of-life drugs, midazolam, morphine.
They're put on drugs that then accelerate their chance of death.
I've had serious threats of violence.
You've had threats of violence?
Oh, yeah.
Murder?
Yeah.
As a doctor, you've had threats of violence and murder because you've decided to look at the evidence and the facts and talk about it.
Yeah.
You're not calling, you're just talking about it.
Yeah.
Information covered up, censorship, corruption. The mainstream media have proven itself to be untrustworthy. I'm here to give a platform for debate, for truth, for open discussion. I'm introducing you to my podcast, Silenced with Tommy Robinson.
Who exactly is Tommy Robinson, or Stephen Yaxley-Lennon?
With the English Defence League, the EDL.
The problem is with Islamic
The English far-right Islamophobic activists.
Since then, there's been organised protests across the country in London, Manchester, Leeds. People in their thousands are marching for Robinson's cause.
There is no such thing in this country as a Muslim.
Free Tommy Robinson!
I'd like to thank you for joining me for my latest episode of Silence, my podcast, where I'm lucky enough to be joined by Dr John Campbell.
Good to see you, Tommy.
Thank you for joining me, John.
Pleasure.
I'd like to, if I can start off, first of all, I'll talk about my journey of what happened with COVID, when COVID started, when the vaccine started, because I see similarities. I saw it start, we saw people dropping in China, then I saw doctors attempting to expose things in China who were silenced and censored. Yep. I watched all of this. I've seen government lies, media lies for the whole of my activism. So I have a lot of distrust. So I didn't trust what we were being told. I think at the start you were more trusting and more listening to what they were saying. And then I saw the mRNA vaccine, and when I started looking into that, I saw that it had been tested on animals and all the animals had died. There was questions over... I just saw so many questions that I sat back and was questioning everything. And it was enough for me to not participate in the vaccine anyway when I saw it was experimental. But can I ask you about your journey of where you started?
Yeah, sure.
And also the fact that you've amassed 2.8 million followers on YouTube.
Yeah, so my background is I've been basically a nurse all my life. So I was a psychiatric nurse when I was 18, then I went on to do general nursing after that. Then I started doing more academic stuff, and I was a nurse tutor. I taught a couple of generations of student nurses, basically. Did that for 27 years. Okay. Then I retired and worked part-time on A&E after that. So I've been in the health service and teaching nurses up for 45 years. And in the health service, it's actually quite hierarchical. So you kind of do what you're told. Now, if a doctor says something silly, you'll question it and talk about it. But at the end of the day, you basically do what you're told. If the consultant says, John, do this, then you go and do it.
Because they've worked their way to that position, they're more knowledgeable.
They're the senior doctors, you do what you're told. And as my career went on, healthcare became more and more protocol-driven. So there's guidelines for pretty well everything now. So we have, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and we use databases like Cochrane.
What do you mean protocol-driven?
Well, rather than if you get a patient, say, who's got asthma, so it's not so much the doctor looking at the patient and saying, oh, well, I think this patient needs, let me think about it, this patient needs probably a bit of salbutamol and a bit of ipratropium bromide and a bit of oxygen. It's not that as much as you look at the national guidelines, and that says try this first, then try that. So it'll have first order treatment, second order treatment, when to escalate. So there's kind of protocols for things. And the thing is, doctors kind of need to follow that. Nurses need to follow that, Because if you deviate from that and something goes wrong,
it's on you.
The first question is, well, why weren't you following the protocol, Yeah. So, I taught resuscitation for 30 years. And every few years, the Resuscitation Council would bring out different guidelines. So you just amend your teaching. But the point is, this was based on the best available evidence. If you take the Resuscitation Council guidelines as an example, that they were always basing it on the latest science, the latest evidence that have international groupings. And if that's what the guideline says, then that was pretty well the state of the knowledge of humanity at that time. So that's kind of the culture I was from. So when the COVID guidelines came out, and again, these were national guidelines, then what you tend to do is just follow them. That's kind of what we're told to do. And we have the chief medical officer, the chief scientific officer, and the prime minister all sitting there.
Sage meetings.
All three of them, all the sage meetings. And there seemed to be a consensus on this. So for me, as an individual with very limited information, I kind of carried on this trusting in protocols. And let me say, most of the protocols in the health service are very, very good.
Yeah.
If you go in with an anaphylactic reaction or a broken leg or whatever it is, following the protocols in the health service is probably your best chance of survival. We have something called the sepsis 6 in A&E. And you follow this, you do these particular tests, you do these particular treatments, and that will optimise your chances of survival. But the problem is, with the COVID protocols, inconsistencies started to arise. And it started, for me, by interviewing people with vaccine injuries. So I've had quite a few people on the channel, and they had vaccine injuries. These were diagnosed by pathological tests by senior doctors, very often after a great deal of difficulty.
Diagnosed as a specific
vaccine injury.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What sort of injuries?
Myocarditis, pericarditis being the main ones, blood clots, neurological features. They're the two main categories: cardiovascular and neurological disability, paralysing type conditions.
Were these young people, old people?
The first ones I interviewed were young, fit people. And I'd just like to compliment the people that came on the channel to do that, because, to go public and talk about your suffering, knowing it's an international audience is a difficult thing to do. And, very often, you and me have been in video cameras before. It's not too hard for us, but, for them it was. And so that started to raise questions. And then I started to look more into the science, because to begin with, we had these adenovirus vector vaccines, like that was the Oxford AstraZeneca one, and the Johnson & Johnson in the States.
Yep.
Then we had these mRNA ribonucleic acid vaccines. And I couldn't work out why the change from the traditional type of vaccine. So it's a traditional vaccine. Basically, you get a load of virus, you mush it up, and you inject it in a dead form. And the immune system comes to recognise this dead form of protein, is what you call antigens or epitopes.
So it knows how to defeat it.
The body learns how to defeat it, absolutely. So that's like saying, that's your enemy over there. If you see that guy, get him. That's the way the immune system works. But why did they go for both of these vaccine approaches? Do not give an antigen. They give the recipe. So instead of me saying, right, there's your chicken masala and chips, Tommy, tuck in, I say, well, there's the recipe for your chicken masala. So trot off to the kitchen and make it yourself, mate. That. Okay, yeah. So the body was making it itself. Now, I couldn't work out why they went flat out for that. So if you're in an emergency situation, which we could argue about that, but at the time many thought COVID was an emergency situation. People were getting sick from COVID. There's
there was a mass propaganda campaign.
There was, but people were still getting sick. My mate's in intensive care. We're looking after people with pathology which was specific to COVID. Okay. Now, yes, a lot of the deaths were caused by things like ventilation, but there was an actual pathology there. So, but I couldn't work out why they were going for these particular new types of vaccines. So you've got a threat, then you would think you would combat that threat with something that was an established, a known treatment, a known approach, and yet they went for this massive new approach that had never been done before. This has never been done. Adenovirus vector vaccines had never been used. mRNA vaccines had never been used. So it seemed to be a bit of a risk. So that started sitting a bit uneasy with me.
What is mRNA? So people sit and think, what is mRNA?
Yeah. So all the cells of your body,
yep.
You have this stuff called DNA in the middle of it, the nucleus. That's deoxyribonucleic acid. Now that is the recipe to make you or me. So what the DNA does is it carries the genetic code. That is the information. So you get half from your mum, half from your dad. It's the genetic code to make the proteins that make the cells, that make the tissues, that make the body. Yep. So the DNA is a double-stranded molecule, the famous double helix. Then that peels in half, and there's a process called transcription, and that changes the DNA message into the RNA message. So now you have the message in RNA, ribonucleic acid. Then that molecule literally trots off from the nucleus, goes into the cytoplasm, the white part of the cell, like the white of the egg round about the cell.
Yep.
And the specific small organs in the cytoplasm of the cell, they're called organelles, and these are called ribosomes. And the RNA goes into the ribosome, and the ribosome takes the information from the messenger RNA, in this case, and strings it into particular amino acids. So 3 sequences, 3 letters in the RNA code for 1 amino acid. So you'll get 1 amino acid there. There's 20 amino acids. Then you'll get the next one, and they'll all chemically combine together. Then you end up with a big string of amino acids. And then they fold in particular ways. It's called protein folding, and they form the proteins. The proteins form the components of the cell, allow for cell growth and allow for cell division. And then many cells make up a tissue, many tissues make up an organ, and many organs make up you and me.
Yeah.
So it is that information. So what the mRNA vaccines did was they gave the RNA directly. So you give the RNA in what's called a lipid nanosome. Nano just means very small. That goes onto the edge of the cell. It's supposed to happen in your arm. It's supposed to happen in the myocytes, the cells of your arm. That RNA goes directly into the cells in your arm. The muscle cells in your arm take that RNA. Because it's RNA, it's sent to the ribosomes in the cell. The ribosomes make the protein that is coded for by that RNA. But in this case, the code, of course, is to make a form of spike protein, because it only produces spike protein. So our ribosome, using the RNA instruction, makes a spike protein, not a whole virus, just the spike protein. That and components of that are then exported to the surface of the cell. So what you end up with is foreign material on the surface of the cell. That means the immune cells that patrol all the cell surfaces in the body recognize that. They say, oh, just a minute, there's a foreign protein here. And they make an antibody to it.
Okay.
That's what's supposed to happen. And that does happen. But the lipid nanosomes are so small, we now know they go everywhere.
They leak.
They leak out of the site. Now they're supposed to go there, and they're supposed to go to the lymph nodes in your armpit. But we now know that they're so small that they go everywhere. That means they're circulating around the body. So these lipid nanosomes.
What's the problem with that?
The problem with that is that the fatty cell membrane on the lipid nanosomes will merge with any other fatty cell membrane, and all the cells that line all of your blood vessels are made of these fatty cell membranes. So, for example, if a lipid nanosome was going through a vessel in your heart, then those vessels in your heart are lined with what we call vascular endothelium.
This is the clots.
It can be. Yeah. You get these smooth cells.
Yep.
The lipid nanosome merges onto the membrane of these smooth cells. The RNA goes in. These cells then make the antigen, which is then sticking on the surface of the cell. But this is a cell now which is in the blood vessels of the myocardium, of the heart, for example. And then, because it's a foreign protein, it will be attacked by the immune system. Now, some cells, immune cells, will recognize that and start making antibodies. So you'll start to get an immune response, which is the purpose of giving the vaccine in the first place. But because it's a foreign protein, you get another group of cells called cytotoxic cell poisoning, cytotoxic T cells. And what they do, rather than surgically remove the particular antigen, it's a bit like having some terrorists in a cave. You don't take them out one at a time. You just chuck in a hand grenade and kill the lot. So what these cytotoxic T cells do is it just takes out the whole cell.
Okay.
And that causes inflammation.
Because that was a cell that was needed.
That cell can be replaced, but the point is it's an inflammatory reaction.
Okay.
But if you kill a lot of these cells at the same time, that will damage what we call the vascular endothelium of the cell, and that can lead to things like blood clotting and things like that. But the key thing is it causes inflammation. Now, inflammation is anything that ends in itis.
Is this what's causing myocarditis?
Yeah. So if you see itis, ITIS,
yep.
So conjunctive itis,
it's inflammation.
Tonsillitis,
okay.
appendicitis, myocarditis, pericarditis, inflammation. Now, if I give you the choice, Tommy, would you like inflammation in your heart or not today?
No.
No. There you go.
But they didn't give people this choice.
Well,
they didn't explain this choice.
This was not fully explained. So a fundamental axiom of healthcare is informed consent. And there was not open discussion of the side effects. So how we define myocarditis is difficult. So obviously some people get it severe, they'll get bad pain, they'll get shortness of breath. If the heart's inflamed, there's actually a risk. The rhythm will become irregular. That's called ventricular fibrillation.
That's heart attack.
It's a cardiac arrest.
Which
you die in 3 minutes. Those
risks.
Which
is why some people who took the vaccine end up having heart attacks instantly.
That is what is currently believed, because if you've got an inflamed area in the myocardium, that becomes electrically unstable, electrically irregular. And if that starts giving off lots of electrical impulses it's not supposed to, then the heart doesn't know what to do, and it just ends up fluttering. So we've got this whole idea of informed consent. But then to get back to your original question, what happened at the end of 2021, 2022? Omicron came along. Now, Omicron is a variant of the SARS coronavirus 2. No one has really yet explained where it came from. So as far as I remember, it came from South Africa, was where it was first identified. But the sequencing in South Africa was pretty good, so it's probably where it was just first identified. It could have come from someone who was immunosuppressed. There's a possibility it came from mice. But the mere fact that has never been explained is kind of curious. Yeah. It's kind of interesting, because humanized mice are used quite a lot in vaccine genetic research.
For testing.
What they actually do is they take some genes from humans and put them into mice. It's called transgenic mice. So that they'll have a human ACE2 receptor, for example, that can be coded for. But so anyway, that's a bit of a distraction. But the point is, Omicron was way less pathogenic. People were not getting sick. Basically, the infection moved from the lower airways to the upper airways. And of course, if you've got infection in the upper airways, it's a cold. We kind of live with that. So we had this disease that was way less pathogenic. People were not getting admitted to intensive care, anything like the numbers. And yet the vaccine protocol stayed the same. And I thought, just a minute, the risk-benefit analysis has changed here. Because whenever you give a treatment, it's always risk-benefit analysis. Now, if you are very sick, I would carry out a treatment on you that might can
have a high risk.
Have very, very high risks.
Because you need it.
If you came in with a collapsed lung, I'm afraid we'd have to stick a tube in your chest. Now, there's a risk to that, but if you don't do it, you'll die.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't do it to you now. Because the risk-benefit analysis is not there. So it's always saying, well, what's the potential benefits here? What is the risk here? And it seemed to me that because I'd been interviewing people with vaccine injuries, and these theoretical risks and the unanswered questions were accumulating, that it started seeming to me like the risk from the vaccine was now greater, especially in the younger demographic, than the risk of taking it. And yet the government guidelines have changed now quite dramatically in my country. There's been, some might say, backpedaling, but they've changed quite dramatically now. Although one thing that does concern me is the government guidelines for this autumn is still recommending vaccination for healthcare workers and care workers.
Regardless of age.
Regardless of age. So if you're a bouncing fit 20-year-old second or third year student nurse,
they're going to put an mRNA vaccine.
The government is still recommending that.
You know, because we know it leaked, but there were warning signs from the start from Dr. Robert Malone, was there not? And so, could they have been aware that this vaccine could cause these heart problems?
There were voices
from the start.
From the start.
And Dr. Robert Malone is the inventor of this.
I believe he was involved in the early developments of mRNA technology.
And he come out saying, "Hold on,
yeah,
this could do this,
this, and
this."
But Sage was saying something else.
Sage was saying something else.
So there was these conflicting opinions. So you've got all these highly qualified government scientists saying one thing, and you've got kind of lone voices saying another thing. And if you're trying to evaluate the relative risks at the time, it's not easy to do. Now, looking back,
Dr. Robert Malone was right and Sage was wrong.
Well, it's oversimplifying it, but he was right about many things, and people that we actually met yesterday, Dr. Peter McCullough, for example, Dr. Pierre Corey, these are world-leading doctors who had these ideas early on, and in my view, it's transpired that the evidence has accumulated more and more to support their position, less and less to support, for example, the position of that Sage took in the early stages of the pandemic. But at the time, it's easy to diagnose with a retrospectoscope. There's a saying in medicine that the retrospectoscope, which doesn't exist, just looking back, casts a clear white light, and it's easy to see at the time. But the big thing that I'm still annoyed about is the people that had the full information at the time. So the Chris Whitties, the Patrick Valences, the head of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority. They had all this information that I didn't have, that wasn't available to the public. They had all this information. We believe they had additional information from the drug companies that wasn't in the public domain. Yet, given that full information, they still made the decisions they did. And a lot of that information is still not public, not transparent. There's this lack of transparency. So the people that should have been taking all this into account, it now appears we're not taking into account everything we would have liked them to take into account.
And why do you think that is? Now, retrospectively, looking back, as we said, looking back at everything we now have, data we have, reasons we have, what they knew, what we didn't know they knew, why do you think?
Well, there's quite a lot of concerns, because if we take the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority in the UK, along with other regulatory authorities around the world, they receive a lot of their funding directly from vested interests and pharmaceutical companies,
who have profited hugely off the vaccine.
The profits are indescribable. Now, no one's saying that is the cause, but it's not a good look.
So the person who's telling us to take the vaccine is receiving mass funding from the vaccine company, making billions off of the vaccine.
To simplify it, yes, that's true. Jonathan Van Tam, for example.
He's just gone and got the job.
He was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. He was responsible for a big part of the committee that purchased vaccines. From memory, it was over 70 million doses of Moderna vaccine that we bought.
We bought 70 million doses. Do you know what the cost of that was?
Well, it was the most expensive. I think it was around about $20, $25 at the time.
$20, $25 at 7 million.
I think. Don't quote me.
And he's working for our government. He's working for our government. And he's left government and gone and got a job.
Gone and got a job with Moderna.
Straight from the company that he's given the contract to for these huge
he actually left the government, worked in academia, I think, for just over a year.
That's to make it look less obvious.
Ask him that when you see him.
Yeah. I'll go find him.
I mean, the serious point here is that when I was talking to Russell Brand a couple of weeks ago, and I said
he's been brilliant on this.
I said, Russell, if I want a job with you, Stay Free Media, I'm not gonna, if I think, a couple of years time, I quite fancy myself on Stay Free Media, I'm not going to start slagging him off. In fact, I'm going to say, this Russell Brand guy is really good. I'm going to ingratiate myself. So, the question is, when when was that job in Professor Van Tam's mind? If it was a week ago, before he took the job, then there's probably no conflict of interest. But it's all murky. It doesn't look good.
I think when we looked at the figures, 90% of people who have been on panels.
That was the American data. The FDA, I think it was between, I think from memory, 2012 to 2018, I think it was.
Yeah.
90% of people that were making decisions in the FDA later went on to work in the
for big pharma.
Related industry.
It looks like a club.
Yeah,
that's how it looks.
It's called the revolving door, and it's not a good look. And it goes the other way around. So Patrick Vallance, for example, was very senior in GlaxoSmithKline, and he left them, I think, in.
What's GlaxoSmithKline?
It's a huge pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
Huge. I think he left them in something like 2017. Then, of course, he was the chief scientific officer all through the pandemic. No one's saying there was any conflict of interest there, but it's just not a good look. We need some way of funding these regulatory agencies so that they are independent, and of course no one's saying they're not independent, but it has to appear independent so that the public can have trust in them again, because the big victim, the big thing that's gone wrong in this pandemic is trust. I get, okay, it's not a scientific sample, but on my videos I'll get 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 comments per video. And an awful lot of those express mistrust in authority. A lot of trust for authority has not, well, some cases it's gone completely. Some cases it's turned into a blatant contempt. But other people, it's like a niggling doubt. Now, there could be another pandemic, Tommy. This is possible.
A legitimate one?
Yeah. There could be a pandemic.
And this is
and some viruses could have a mortality rate. I mean, if you take Ebola, for example, 60 or 70% of people that get that are going to die. And it is possible that there's a virus with very high pathogenicity and very high transmissibility. A serious viral pandemic is an existential threat to civilized humanity. Hopefully it won't happen. But it could. And if it did, how much would people
believe? None. That's the dangerous situation we're in now.
So it is kind of a crying wolf situation. The shepherdess cried wolf when she was guarding the sheep just to watch the villagers run because it was fun.
The problem is they did cry wolf, and I think now the general public are seeing, no, you lied. You lied about this, you lied about the lockdowns, you lied about the masks, even they were making school children wear masks. Yeah. There's no evidence that it does anything. So when people see those lies, as I said, I've had a distrust for years of all of them. But we are now in a dangerous situation where there could be a pandemic, we could get into war, we could come from China, it could come from Russia, anything could happen.
Yep.
And I believe now masses of our population will not believe you. We think you're lying, it's a false flag. Yep. So it's a dangerous situation.
I mean, there's that threat, there's the warfare threat, escalations, there's damage to nuclear facilities in Ukraine. That's really quite a big concern of mine. You've got a lot of radioactive elements sitting around in pretty well shut down.
There's a lot of biolabs there as well, weren't there?
I really don't know that. I've heard that.
Making more coronaviruses.
I couldn't answer that with any sort of authority or not. Yeah. The American authorities do have scientific interests around the world. We can certainly say we can certainly say that, but I can't answer that specifically. Yeah. But for sure, you've got these nuclear power stations in Ukraine, and if it was going badly wrong for one side or the other, they would make one heck of a mess.
And the point being, for one side or the other, because even if a nuclear power station was blown up tomorrow in Ukraine, there'd be many in the West, in our nations, who would look at our own governments similar to the Nord pipeline, and they would look to say, well, who has done that? Do we believe Russia's done that? Or have you done it? Has America done that? Because they want to cut.
It wouldn't matter too much who'd done it. It would depend more on which direction the wind was blowing at the time. Because I remember Chernobyl. The reason that the Chernobyl accident in Ukraine, of course, The reason that we knew about it in the UK was not because we were informed by the Soviet authorities. The first thing we knew in the UK was near where I live in Cumbria, the radiation alarms went off in Sellafield.
Wow.
So the radiation alarms were going off and the guys were going, heck, we've got a leak. And they looked around, oh, there's no leak here. And yet the radiation alarms were going off because the wind had blown from Ukraine to Sellafield to Cumbria. And of course, Cumbrian sheep weren't allowed to be eaten for years after that because of the radioactive cesium. These things are risks. And when there is a big risk like that, we need government to tell us what to do, to work out the best thing. But if we're in a situation now where there's reduced trust in government...
Do you have reduced trust? Because you seem to have a lot of trust at the start.
I have reduced trust in government, yeah.
Now. And that's the development over the last 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always had suspicions about pharmaceutical industries and never a big fan of politicians. But in many cases, that's grown from slight mistrust to contempt. It's escalated a lot, and they're there for 10 minutes. A lot of these politicians, where's Matt Hancock gone? Where's his accountability? He was here for a while, then he's scooted off to the jungle, and then, there's no continuity. He should, if he was still sitting there at his desk to answer these questions. But he's not. It's kind of another revolving door situation. We don't have continuity of accountability, and that is I see that as a problem. But the main thing is that people don't trust governments anything like as much as they did, and we need good government. And do we always have that? Well, the answer appears no, not as much as we would like.
If an awakening moment for you was talking to the vaccine injured,
yeah.
Have they been given a fair platform? Has there been censorship?
No, they're not given a fair platform. One obvious reason for that is under-reporting of adverse reactions.
Under-reporting by?
This is for any drug. Well, in the UK, we have what we call the yellow card scheme. So in the old days, this was yellow cards, and doctors used to fill them out, nurses used to fill them out. Now anyone can fill them out. It's online. And people can report adverse reactions after any drug. So if you took aspirin and had an anaphylactic reaction to that, you could report that on this yellow card scheme. But the point is, doctors underreport adverse reactions, and that's known. So data from the British Medical Journal estimates that only about 10% of serious adverse reactions are reported. Less serious reactions, it's probably under 5% that are actually reported. So sometimes doctors don't recognise this. Or sometimes someone might get, say, a vaccine or a drug, then 3-4 months later they might have a particular problem. They don't associate it. They don't realise. So sometimes it's just deliberately not bothering to report these things. Other times the association is not recognised. So we end up with gross underreporting, and the all-party parliamentary group looking into COVID at the moment estimated that underreporting could be as high as 98%. In other words, what we can say is between 2 and 10% of adverse reactions are probably not reported. So how do you monitor this if reactions are simply not being reported?
Am I also right that the reactions, anything that happens in the first 14 days is not classed as vaccine related?
That was related to that was data related to infection. So people would have the vaccine, and it's recognised that it takes a week or 2 weeks to build up the immunity. So if someone was vaccinated and then got an infection the week after, that wasn't counted as a vaccine protected infection.
But if someone was vaccinated and died the next day,
then that may or may not be reported on the yellow card scheme, depending on the individuals involved.
Okay.
The underreporting is a big issue, and it's not just in the UK. This is everywhere.
What do you think of how the media have?
Well,
do you think that they've been fair on the representation of how bad COVID was? Do you think they've been fair on the vaccine?
I never liked national media in the UK, and now I'm openly contemptuous of it. They have just put out, as far as I can see, one particular narrative. And if you disagree with that, you're thrown to the fact checkers, who can work out elaborate ways of pointing out why you're wrong, but in actual fact all they're doing is giving another opinion. So I've been fact-checked so many times.
I saw that in 2020. In 2020 they spoke very highly of you. 2022 I think they were labelling you...
Well, I've never been invited onto the BBC.
Okay. You don't want to?
No, I suspect that's not going to happen. No. Mainstream media has largely followed a particular narrative, not questioning vaccine safety extensively enough.
Do you find that insane? The fact that, because mainstream media are supposed to be the journalists that investigate both sides of everything.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the big things in this. If we take the whole ivermectin story, the hydroxychloroquine story, you know, I was talking to Tess Laurie about this. She's one of the doctors that did the original meta-studies on this back in 2020. And I said, where the heck are the investigative journalists tearing this apart? Where the heck are the investigative journalists? You know, if Watergate had happened now, Tricky Dicky would probably get away with it.
Watergate, explain.
Watergate was where the people working for President Nixon back in the I don't know, early 70s, I guess, late 60s, actually broke into the offices of the opposition to get dirt and information on the.
And what you're saying is, if that happened now, no one would be investigating.
So Richard Nixon used, or his cronies used burglary to get information on their enemies.
Okay.
And that was blown apart by investigative journalists. I can't remember from the paper now. It might have been New York Times. I'm not sure about that.
Well, it certainly wouldn't be investigated now.
It's
the New York Times.
But as a result of that, he was impeached and resigned.
Okay.
You know, where are the people investigating the trust fund that Richie Sunak started in 2013, I believe it was, the Leam?
Explain this. So Rishi Sunak
all I know is an article from The Guardian, which is not my favourite paper, but apparently Rishi Sunak, before he came into politics, there was a trust fund called the Leam. They put a lot of money, we believe $500 million into Moderna back in
12% shares?
That's the figure I've heard. I couldn't substantiate that. But the figure in The Guardian was $500 million US. You know, that's... No, of course, we're not saying our Prime Minister's corrupt in any way.
But he just gave a contract for the next 10 or 15 years.
Well, the British government has just agreed to a contract. We believe it's for £1 billion. £1
billion to
over 10 years.
To build a plant.
They're building the plant now,
Moderna
we
plant.
believe. Yep, Moderna plant near Oxford. Some people say it's going to produce 150 million doses of mRNA vaccines a year. Some say it's going to produce 250 million doses a year. There's a similar plant being built near. I'm pretty sure it's Melbourne. Anyway, it's certainly Australia. There's a similar plant being built in Canada, both going to produce 100 million doses of mRNA vaccine a day. And this is for a company that no one had heard of until, well, apart from people that were starting trust funds in 2013. You know, these things, you know, if this
Why
is...
do they need that many mRNA vaccines? Why are they 250 million a year? We've got a population of, what, 60 million?
Yeah, so there seems to be a great deal of interest in converting traditional style vaccines into mRNA-type vaccines.
Why?
So, that is a really, really good question, Tommy, and one I'm not in a position to answer. You know, my axiom in healthcare is if it ain't bust, don't fix it.
Is it for public health? Does this sound like it's for public health?
Well, they want to improve. Influenza vaccine at the moment is pretty pathetic. Yeah. The coverage is useless. It only gives you coverage for a few months. So they want a flu vaccine that's going to give you high levels of coverage for longer periods of time. So the flu vaccine, they're working, we believe, on an mRNA flu vaccine. There's another one called respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. They're working on an mRNA vaccine for that, we believe. And there's also vaccines, I don't understand this, but there's a lot of vaccines that are going to treat potentially different types of cancer. And that's potentially quite an exciting development in treatment of cancers, that you could take an immunological approach to treating cancer. Because if you have even a fairly advanced cancer, and for some reason, it's called spontaneous recovery, sometimes the immune system will recognise that those cancer cells are abnormal and eradicate them. So that's actually potentially quite exciting. But there's a big difference there. If you take healthy people and inject those with a vaccine that's going to stop them getting disease, and they've got a big risk of a side effect from that vaccine, then that risk-benefit analysis thing is not there. But, you know, we've seen statistics on cancer.
since the vaccines.
Let me finish off the one I'm talking about. That's you've opened up another can of worms there. But if you had, and God forbid, you or I had an advanced cancer, and there was a treatment that say had, a pretty good chance of curing us, but there was a 1 in 100 chance of dying, 1 in a 5% chance of dying. If we're going to die anyway, then that's kind of a risk we would take.
Yep.
Because if it improves your chances of survival, then we would take that. But that's for people with the cancer already. So it's a risk-benefit analysis thing. Now, what I was talking about before, the systemic absorption of these lipid nanoparticles going everywhere, producing antigens that the immune system beats up on all around the body, I don't see why that problem is limited to spike protein. Any foreign protein being produced in the blood vessels, in the heart, for example, would cause a very similar reaction from the immune system, an inflammatory reaction. So until this question is answered, I don't think it would be. I would feel if I was conducting the clinical trials on new mRNA vaccines, and that question had not been thoroughly answered, for me, I would feel I was acting unethically to recruit people into those vaccine trials, because that's a fundamental question that has not been answered. Now, Senator Gerard Rennick was very good on this in the Australian Senate. So he had a couple of representatives from Pfizer Australia, and he said, do you know the mechanism by which your vaccine causes myocarditis? And they flannelled around this question. We do notice there's very rare side. And that's not the question I asked. I'm not asking about rare side effects. Do you know the mechanism?
By mechanism, what does that mean?
The mechanism is how that's going wrong.
Happening.
How that's going wrong.
Because if you don't,
so the mechanism of an illness is, for example, if you have a viral infection, the virus will invade cells and kill cells. That's the mechanism of action. If you have furring up of your arteries, then that can cause turbulence in the blood. That can cause a blood clot. The blood clot will block off the circulation. It's the mechanism, what we would call the pathophysiological mechanism. So he said, do you know this mechanism? And ultimately, these two doctors wouldn't answer that question. They said they didn't know, which is incredible. They said they didn't know that. And they took it on notice. And they did eventually get back to him. And they did give some immunological reason why there might be a problem in myocarditis. But they didn't seem to address this fundamental problem with the lipid nanoparticles acting as vectors, carrying these things around the body. So until someone can clearly explain to me that, no, if we had a RSV vaccine, or if we had an influenza RNA vaccine, this is why your fears, John, are unjustified. This is why it won't float off to the lining of the heart, the vascular endothelium in the coronary arteries, and cause problems there. Your question was legitimate, but here's a satisfactory answer to it. Then we could carry on. But until that fundamental, basic pathophysiological question is answered, I don't really see how we can ethically proceed with this, because it's a legitimate question.
Any more mRNA vaccines?
This would apply to any mRNA vaccine that coded for a foreign antigen. Until we can be assured that they're not systemically distributed. Now, they may have worked on this new Moderna plant, may have found out a way to make sure there's no systemic distribution. But that needs to be open, it needs to be public, and it needs to be able to be peer-reviewed by the world's scientists. We need that published, transparent.
And that's if the reason for these vaccines was to actually help.
Yes.
Because we've seen at this conference we attended yesterday, there's lots of people with different of opinions around the world now that are speaking out on the motive of the vaccine.
Correct.
What's your belief in the motive of the vaccine? In hindsight, looking at everything that's going on now, looking at what they knew and what they didn't tell us, looking at the fact they're now... Is the motive profit, or is the motive...
Oh, well people? I mean, the motive in business is always profit, of course.
And this is business, this isn't public health.
Of course, profit is the motive of that. Business exists to make profit.
But is what's happening with our government, is it business or is it public health? in your opinion?
That transparency is simply not there. I don't have the data to answer that question, which is part of the problem. Lack of transparency of government decision making is a fundamental reason for the lack of trust. But do I have strong suspicions that there's financial motives? Yeah, I've got suspicions. I can't prove that. But
we're simply putting it that because it's insane for anyone to listen to this. Rishi Sunak invests money in a fund in 2013 of £500 million. He buys 12% shares in Madonna. Rishi Sunak is now the leader of our country. He wasn't elected. There was a coup. He's now in charge of our country, and he has just given a contract for £1 billion.
Well,
that he is going to personally benefit from in a huge manner.
We are assured that all his interests are now blinded.
Assured by who? Rishi Sunak. At the point being, there's no investigative journalism. There's no.
It doesn't. What I'm saying, Tommy, is it doesn't look good. It needs to be transparent.
Follow the money.
Why aren't investigative journalists picking this to pieces? You know, why isn't this completely clear and above board? And at the moment, there's things that don't look good.
If you follow the money and everything, but if you, in the sense of cancer, since the vaccine, people who have taken this vaccine, are they more likely to now develop cancer? Is this an attack on our immune system?
Yeah, if you look at the Office for I can't remember what it's called now, the Office for Healthcare and Improvement or something like that in the UK. There's some conditions that have become more common during the pandemic, and there's some that have become less common. So interestingly, the one that's classified as other lung diseases, way less people are dying of other lung diseases, which is a bit surprising if you think that COVID attacks the lungs. Yeah, so that category is down. All the vascular diseases are clearly up. So there's more deaths from strokes, more deaths from heart attack. All the cardiovascular disease. Heart failure.
Up by a lot, up by very small.
Yeah, significantly.
Significantly,
since the vaccine. Yeah. Now, if you look at those trends on cancer, the trends from the Office for Health Improvements, it's not as... with the cancer ones, it's more ambiguous. Some months it's up, some months it's slightly down. Different cancers, it's different. But the trends on lung disease are down. Liver disease is up quite dramatically. Liver cirrhosis, that's fibrous tissue forming in the liver, which is basically the end product of any long-term liver inflammation, which is a concern. Heart diseases, strokes, heart failure are all up. We are watching the cancer data with great interest. Now, other sources of information are saying that there's more cancer deaths are occurring more.
And I saw figures for breast cancer.
I haven't seen any recent figures on that, but it really is a major problem in the UK that people can't get to see their GPs readily. It's really quite difficult. I was in my GP surgery last few days ago for a blood test, and the place was like the Mary Celeste. There was hardly anyone there because, traditionally you'd have a big list of patients. The GP would say, right, Mr. Campbell.
No, they just won't.
No, well, it's you basically need a telephone triage to get to see your doctor. And that is a fundamental problem because I can look at your face now, Tommy, and because I've been doing this for 45 years, I can see you're in reasonable shape today. But if you were had a slight pallor, if there was a slight dullness in your eyes, if there was a slight blueness around your lips, I would spot that half a mile away. And you can't do that on the phone. So people that are actually... I've come across individuals that actually look quite ill. And if I'd seen them at work, I would go to the consultant and say, can you look at Mrs. Jones, please? She doesn't look well to me. And that's what I would do. I would go into a cubicle on A&E when I was working there after I retired. Patient didn't look right. I would do a few investigations maybe myself, but if they don't look right, I'll just go to the doctor and say, look, this patient doesn't look right. They don't look right. And the doctor would realise that I'm experienced at looking at people. And they'd say, well, John's not happy. I'm going to go and check this out. And then they would find something.
So you think the rise in some of these figures could be because of many reasons?
Yeah. Now, is there mechanisms via which mRNA vaccines could potentially cause mutations that lead to cancer? Yeah, there is. But it is multifactorial. But the health service being in a complete mess, which it is at the moment in the UK, is such a confounding variable It really confuses the issue. So what is vaccine damage? What is not being able to see your GP? What is the terrible waiting list in huge parts of the NHS? There's something like 7 million people waiting for different procedures now. You've got all these factors that are increasing overall mortality. Now, make no mistake about it. Overall mortality is higher than it should be, and it has been for quite some time.
Well, 3 years since the vaccine.
Since it's been higher basically since 2020, but 2021, 2022, 2023, when COVID was down. What we'd actually expect after a pandemic, so in 2020, 2021, a lot of older, already vulnerable people died. Now, given that those people died, they're the people that were probably old and vulnerable and probably would have died the year after, the year after, the year after that. A lot of those people would have died within a few years after.
And do you think they died because of COVID, or did they die because of the treatment they were given for COVID?
Yeah, that's a good question. But the fact that this vulnerable population had died means that the death rate should actually be way less.
Yeah, because the vulnerable people...
Because the population is healthier.
So it's a healthier population.
Yeah. So we've got excess mortality,
but really,
when we would expect it to be lower mortality. So even if the mortality had been the same, that's still higher than we would have expected after a pandemic that selected out older people. But it's actually higher. Now, going on to your other question, how many deaths were actually COVID related? Now, we have a concept in healthcare called iatrogenesis. Iatros is Greek for doctor, so iatrogenic is anything caused by medical treatment. Now, I'm actually collecting some data at the moment, talking to people in care facilities. And they were in a situation where, in the waves of the pandemic, where they were not able to get doctors in to see their patients. So I won't go into geographical areas, but I've talked to people that are relatively junior registered nurses who were talking to doctors, reporting the condition of their patients, which, to be honest, a year or two out of training, you're not in a good position to do, really. But they were doing that. And very often, when patients were diagnosed with COVID, the philosophy of treatment changed to palliative. Now, palliative just means you make the patient comfortable, and
then don't treat them.
Well, they were not. Very often, patients in care homes were not given oxygen. Sometimes that wasn't available, but they were often put on what we call end-of-life drugs, midazolam, morphine.
They were put on drugs that then accelerate their chance of death. Yeah. So someone's diagnosed, they've got COVID, which we now know, and
they could have recovered from.
They could have recovered from. And they were put on end-of-life drugs, which actually killed them.
Accelerated the end of their life. That is, I've got instances where that happened. The extent to which that happened, we don't know. And the big question. So, what I'm kind of doing now is what you call a qualitative research. So I'm talking to people, and I'm getting themes like the cupboards were stuffed full of end-of-life drugs.
They bought so many.
They were ordered in case they were needed to alleviate the suffering that often goes around. Now,
that's what we're told.
Yeah. Well, if you're dying of a painful cancer, then we give end-of-life drugs, and that's a great blessing. Morphine's a wonderful drug.
Okay.
Wonderful drug if used correctly. But older people that are vulnerable, especially if they're ill. So if you came into A&E department and you had a broken ankle, I'd give you 10 milligrams of morphine without batting an eyelid. You'd be fine. You give that to an old person, it's possible.
This podcast is brought to you by Urban Scoop. Any support to carry on this work will be greatly appreciated. Please visit urbanscoop.news/support us. Thank you.
What about the ventilators?
Yeah,
because we our process was if they're in with COVID, they're getting ventilators.
Yeah. So, intensive care doctors, people in intensive care have always known that ventilation, of course, is a very dangerous thing to do. If I put you on a ventilator now as a fit person, there's a chance that you could die of a complication from that. So ventilation's always been dangerous. We've known that. But of course, intensive care doctors are very aware of this. But they were getting people in with acute respiratory distress syndrome in the alveoli, and they were often being ventilated following previous protocols. But the point is, COVID gave rise to symptoms via a different pathophysiological mechanism to other diseases. So intensive care doctors had to learn how to treat this new disease. And to be fair to them, they did learn pretty quick.
Learn what they actually we shouldn't be putting them on ventilators.
The ventilation is very particularly dangerous in COVID.
Because the ventilators were killing them.
Yes, people were going on ventilators and not getting off them, yeah. But they did learn that pretty quick. Okay. So did overventilation result in deaths that were unnecessary early in the pandemic? Yeah, I think they did. Did the doctors learn pretty quick? Because you're dealing with intensive care consultants. They're not stupid people.
Yeah.
They learn pretty quick. That,
but was it down to them? Were they allowed to decide, no, I'm not putting these people on ventilators? Or was it down to the government?
Yeah. Intensive care consultants do work pretty independently.
Okay.
Yeah, it is less protocol driven than, for example, a vaccination protocol.
Okay.
Or a protocol for treating asthma. Yeah, they do have genuine independent clinical autonomy, and they did learn pretty quick. But to be fair, it was a new disease, and you have to learn how to treat it. Now, was there massively missed opportunities there? So, for example, we've talked to Pierre Corey from the States. He testified to Senate in the States and said, well, I think we should be using steroids, prednisolone. So what happens in COVID is you get the acute infection, and then you suffer from the inflammation from that infection. So to get rid of the inflammation, steroids saved a lot of lives, giving drugs like prednisolone and other steroids. Pierre Corey advocated that to Senate. It was taken on board, and it was basically rolled out internationally. A lot of lives were saved. And then he found his patients were getting better with another drug, ivermectin. He testified before Senate again. Senate took that information on board, and I looked at the early information on that and thought, yeah, this is pretty promising. But that one was, I think it's not unfair to use the word suppressed.
When we say suppressed, I can't say the word.
Ivermectin
is a very cheap drug.
Oh, it's basically free.
It's a free drug that could have, so the evidence now shows, would treat COVID, but the pharmaceutical companies would not have made the billions and billions.
I have talked to a lot of very senior, very skilled doctors who assure me that they have seen dramatic benefit from treating COVID with ivermectin.
And am I right that we saw evidence yesterday that in 2018, before the pandemic, ivermectin was removed from France? The French government attempted to suppress it.
I don't know about. I've never heard that one. Okay. But ivermectin is on the World Health Organization list of essential medicines. So ivermectin, it's been around for a while now. It's billions, up to 4 billion doses of ivermectin have been given to human beings. So when the FDA said, "Come on, you all." You're not a horse, you're not a cow.
They said it was dangerous.
They said it was dangerous.
When COVID started, they said this drug, which has been proven as safe, is dangerous.
Ivermectin is a very safe drug, but there's a complete axiom in healthcare that you give the right dose of the right drug to the right patient via the right route at the right time. All drugs have to be given via that area. So the right dose of the right drug to the right route to the right patient at the right time. If you give the wrong dose, all drugs are going to be toxic. That's why we have doctors. That's why we have pharmacists, to give the right dose of the right drug to the right patient at the right time via the right route. If people start medicating themselves, of course, that's intrinsically dangerous. So if this drug had been made readily available through doctors in the States who were more than happy to prescribe it, or here that were more than happy to prescribe it, then it could have been given in safe doses. And that risk of potential side effects would not have been there.
The media made this. The media made any doctors talking about this. They made a mockery.
It was completely suppressed. Any mention of ivermectin on social media or hydroxychloroquine was automatically taken down. Doctors who advocated
taken down by social media companies, by big tech.
Yeah.
We've seen now from the Twitter leaks that the government were involved in telling the big tech companies of what to remove and who to silence.
Yeah, I haven't got the full details on that, but it wouldn't surprise me. There was one narrative that was allowed,
Why do you think? Why do you think ivermectin was suppressed? Why do you think all of these things were happening and only one narrative was allowed?
My personal view?
Yeah.
Ivermectin's cheap.
Okay.
You can't
Profit.
make money
So
out of it.
Business again. It's business.
Yeah.
It's not public health care then.
No, I don't think so. To me, the evidence for ivermectin is there.
Yeah.
And perhaps having effects against other viruses as well as SARS coronavirus too. But there were opportunities given early in the pandemic. Researchers in Japan, for example, were prepared to do large-scale studies on ivermectin. Santoshi Omura and William Campbell won the Nobel Prize for ivermectin in 2015. And the Japanese authorities offered to do this, but Merck didn't really want to follow that up. Merck were the main producers. Ivermectin has basically eradicated some truly horrible diseases, parasitic diseases around the world. And the community health project I'm involved in Uganda, we use ivermectin for parasitic diseases. Wonderful, wonderful drug. But it appears it also has antiviral properties, and they are not being exploited because the pharmaceutical industries were working on their own antivirals, sophisticated antivirals, but partly based on research that was done for antiretroviral drugs in HIV, which has transformed HIV treatment around the world. HIV, remember, was a death sentence. We lost Freddie Mercury, for goodness sake. These days it would be easy to save his life. So many other tragic losses. So that's been great, but they had all these other antivirals that were in the pipeline, and these were hugely expensive. So from a purely industry-based point of view, why would you want a dirt cheap effective antiviral
from a business
when you can have an expensive one?
Well, we saw there was an Australian businessman, an Australian billionaire, who bought enough ivermectin for the whole of Australia.
I've heard that. I haven't got a detail on that.
And it was seized by the Australian government. So then it's not just about. Then it's like they have purposely, governments and politicians have purposely prevented a remedy to this disease in the very early days,
or at least prevented the clinical trials which would have conclusively demonstrated it. We did do a clinical trial in the UK.
How can anyone trust them?
Well, this is the problem. There's a big clinical trial done in the UK in Oxford on ivermectin. We haven't got the results yet.
No, you won't get them.
But and then there's the funding. I mean, my talk yesterday, we were talking about this. The principles of evidence-based medicine. Yep. Best available evidence, expert opinion, patient preferences. Best available evidence, though, it's the drug companies that are very often funding the trials.
So the best available evidence is the evidence that they're giving us.
It means that the trials that are done are selected. So if there's a nice dirt cheap treatment of a generic drug, why should they bother doing a clinical trial on that?
They won't. They'll pick a clinical trial on the most expensive one, and then they'll say this works, even if it's just got one little alternative to the cheap.
Correct. And that is the problem.
And that's business.
That's business, and it's not good for my health, and it's not good for your health, and I think it's appalling, and I think it needs to change. I think we need completely independent methods of researching drugs.
Do you see any? Do you see it changing?
No, I don't see it changing. It's a real problem. Government should be researching these drugs completely independently, based purely on scientific medical grounds. And at the moment, that research is simply not being prioritised.
Didn't the Indian government attempt that at the start with one of these vaccines, and then the vaccine company just pulled out of their country and said, "Okay, we're not going to India"?
I'm pretty sure. I think what happened there was that the mRNA producing Moderna, Pfizer, they wanted indemnity. So we can sell you billions of doses, but they want a complete indemnity. As far as I know, the Indian government wouldn't give them an indemnity, so they said, "Oh, we'll take a ball home and play somewhere else."
Are we right? If ivermectin was
ivermectin,
if ivermectin was if ivermectin was curable for COVID, they would never have got the emergency use given to them, which would then allow them not to be penalised for any of the deaths.
This is absolutely true.
So that's why they suppressed
it's not so much the indemnity. I think the indemnity is a separate thing. Okay. But this is true in the United States.
They can't be held accountable.
The indemnity means they can't be held accountable for adverse reactions.
So that's why
the governments gave them indemnity. But what you're referring to now is the FDA. I don't know about the UK, but the FDA have got a clause in the States, which of course is the biggest market. And that clearly says if there's an alternative treatment available, you can't have emergency use authorization on a new treatment. So if ivermectin had been effective, then they wouldn't have been able to get emergency use authorizations on the vaccines, as I read the FDA guidelines.
Which would have meant that every single person who's been vaccine injured now could have sued the hell out of them.
No. I think the indemnity is a separate thing.
Okay.
What it means is the vaccines wouldn't have got the emergency use authorization, and the rollout would never have started.
Okay. Where has this changed? Has what you've seen develop changed your opinion on vaccines per se? Would you say now if you had young children again, as a doctor now, if you had young children again, would you be advising for the flu jab? Would you be advising?
Can of worms, Tommy. Really hard one. You know, to tell you the truth, I have not done a detailed analysis of all the different vaccines. Ones. So I am...
Do you blame parents now would you say, because parents now will be saying, you're not sticking any of those vaccines in my kid.
That is the problem.
But some of them can help.
I mean, what I would say is I have seen children and adults die of tetanus.
Yeah, okay.
And tetanus vaccine does prevent tetanus. And it's not nice.
No.
You know, I've seen children with what we call perinatal tetanus, and I'm distressed thinking about it now.
Yeah, okay.
It's horrible.
Okay.
But to answer your question, I would have to have detailed knowledge of every individual it's
before
not
advising on
there's no such thing as vaccines. It's every individual one.
Yeah.
And to answer that question, I'd have to be much more encyclopedic than I am. So I really can't give an answer. I mean, basically, at the moment, I would still follow government protocols unless I had a reason not to. I'm not a revolutionary.
No, okay, I get it. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. I get it. What about
good question? The big
because there'll be lots of people asking these. Lots of parents will be sitting at home now. With children that when they're calling them in in lower school, they're saying we need to vaccinate. Parents who have seen all these lies now may be making the wrong decisions based on other vaccines.
I know, and I am convinced that vaccination has prevented a lot of human pain, suffering, and death. Okay. But to answer that for every individual vaccine is a really difficult question. Yeah. But you're right, the loss of trust is a problem. And I really feel that the paediatric community does need to step up to the plate on this and say, these are the vaccines that we recommend in childhood. Here's the rationale for that. Here's the evidence for that. Because a big argument against traditional vaccines at the moment is that very often they haven't been tested against a control group.
Well, I see so many people, I see statistics talking about, what's it called when you're on the spectrum? Autism.
Autism, yeah.
I've seen so many people saying, no, in fact, I saw one in the United States where they've done the Amish community who do not get any vaccines. Yeah. There's no cases of autism within the Amish community. Yeah. Yet now, every single friend, most of my friends have got an autistic child now. Yeah. The level has gone through the roof, and people are now looking at now we're looking round at everything and linking it to vaccines.
I feel that because that question has been asked, and because that question is in the public domain, I feel that the regulatory vaccine authorities and the paediatric community should answer that question. Yeah. Personally, I'm not in a position to answer it, but because that question. You're not asking that question, you are reflecting the fact that millions of people around the world are asking that question. Yeah. And I really feel that should be answered by the people in the paediatric community that advocate these treatments. It is a legitimate question, and it's probably got a legitimate answer. I can't give it to you, but I feel that should be communicated via the paediatric community into the public domain.
If the government told us in the next 4 weeks or 6 weeks, as some are guessing, that there's going to be lockdowns and there's going to be mask mandates, would you be one of the people abiding by that protocol?
What would be the reason for giving these mandates?
I don't know. Probably climate change.
If it was a new, completely different type of respiratory virus that was killing 50% of the people that were infected,
it's a different story.
Of course.
Okay.
If it's for SARS coronavirus 2, I believe the balance of evidence is that masks do not prevent it, because the virus is endemic. It gets everywhere. You've probably been exposed to it the day before you start wearing the masks. We know that unless you're wearing quite sophisticated masks all the time, they don't block the virus. The idea that you can stop an endemic virus, to me, is pretty ludicrous. You can't stop it. Now, in the early stages, the whole thing was Boris Johnson wanted to flatten the sombrero. Do you remember that?
Flatten the curve.
Flatten the curve.
Flatten the curve.
Yeah. Now, there is rationale to that, because we didn't want the health service to be overwhelmed. That does make sense. Now,
let everyone get it.
Now, the idea that you can stop transmission of a new, more transmissible variant, an Omicron derivative, you can't stop that transmission. It's going to get, if it's more transmissible than the current types of Omicron that we have now, which are already massively transmissible, it's going to get everywhere.
Can I ask how has
so no, I wouldn't comply is the answer.
No,
if I had the option is
do
to
not
answer
comply.
that question. Yeah.
Okay. How has your life changed since this? So you've gone from believing in the system, trusting the system in every way. Now you're looking and you're questioning lots of things.
Questioning
as
a lot
doctor,
of things.
You're questioning it. Has that changed your life? Has your rise in popularity, because you've gone from 500,000 views to 20 million views at one? I'm looking through, it's tens of millions, hundreds of millions. The people are watching your videos. Has it changed your life?
The answer is not that much, really. I suppose it should do. I've certainly accumulated quite a few enemies. That there's people dedicate their time and lives to attacking me in various ways.
Do you think they're doing that independently?
No. I think it's largely coordinated and controlled.
You think it's coordinated?
I think it's both. I think there are individuals who use the popularity of my YouTube channel to promote their own videos.
Yep.
Because if they put John Campbell on the thing, they'll get a few clicks. Yeah. But I also think there is a coordinated opposition. We do know that the 77th Brigade is a unit of the British Army. It does exist.
What's the 77th Brigade?
I wish I knew, Tommy.
Yeah.
It is a subdivision, largely of the British Territorial Army. Look on their website; it's there. They are there to wage war in the information arena.
So we have a British Army regiment whose job it is to wage war. This sounds similar because the police used to have a special demonstration squad.
Okay.
And they used to have this squad, and their job was to wage war demonstrations. So
okay.
if you've got a peaceful demonstration,
right,
they send the special demonstration squad in, and they make it violent.
Okay.
And then everyone sees the headlines, violent demonstrations, and takes away the mainstream narrative of the group.
I don't know about that.
So there's a 77th Brigade whose job it is to wage
to protect the country against external information threats, I believe, is
to protect the country or to protect Big Pharma? To protect business or to protect people?
Their agenda is not transparent to me.
So you feel as a doctor,
who knows?
There's coordinated attacks against yourself, but not just against yourself. Everyone we've spoke to this weekend.
I've had serious threats of violence.
You've had threats of violence.
Oh yeah.
Murder.
Yeah.
As a doctor, you've had threats of violence and murder because you've decided to look at the evidence and the facts and talk about it.
Yeah.
You're not calling, you're just talking about it.
Yeah. And I'm careful not to give advice or to prescribe.
You've been.
It's just to illuminate the issues.
Has that, and how does that make you feel? Having threats? No. Actually, how does it make you feel? I've met your wife.
Yeah.
How does it make your wife feel? And your family feel?
Pretty uncomfortable.
Worried?
Me personally, I don't believe I'm going to die till the day that's appointed for me to die. Yeah. To be quite honest. I'm not. The road up to death terrifies me. I've seen people die difficult deaths. Seen people die peaceful deaths. The actual, I am completely resigned to my own death. I've seen people die at all ages throughout my career. And I've always had a cognitive awareness, and now I'm 66 now. The chances of dying gets quite a lot higher as you get older. For me personally, nah, it's okay.
Who do you blame? Those threats of violence and threats of murder and death threats.
Yeah.
Who do you blame for them? Because would you accept that when the media or journals or the people who have attacked you and portrayed you in a way that isn't genuine? Right.
No. One of the emails said,
"Yep,"
and this makes sense, that it is better to kill one man than allow him to give disinformation which kills thousands. Now,
where have they took that from?
Well, the fact that the people that we might call trolls, who are saying that what I'm saying is dangerous, then you'll get some head case sitting in his attic or his basement somewhere.
Thinks he's doing the world a favour.
Yeah. Actually believes the trolls at face value. And it's right. If there was 5 men in a bomber plane in the Second World War coming over, they could have dropped bombs on London that killed 1,000 people. Which is better? Kill those 5 men by shooting the plane down, allowing them to bomb 1,000 people in London? I would have shot that plane down.
Of course.
I'm not a pacifist.
No.
So for someone to take someone like me who's killing thousands of people in their eyes to kill one man,
if they believe it,
surely that's better than allowing me to kill thousands.
Which then that's the worry.
That is the concern, and that is why these trolls who appear like academic trolls are actually quite dangerous, because you get the head cases out there who actually believe them. But I've had threats from people that aren't head cases. I can't give you the details.
There was a filmmaker who was killed by a left-wing activist who actually thought he was doing the world making the world a better place.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't really pretend to be so grandiose. All I do is discuss. Yeah. I would hope this has beneficial effects, but discussing things that are going on. And certainly the 1 or 2 of the emails that have been sent have been investigated, and they're untraceable. So they've been sent by people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. It's all, and that's at one level of maybe by the 77th Brigade. But that's
well, the transparency would be appreciated.
That's one level of pressure. That is another pressure tactic to put on not just yourself but your family.
I think
shut you up.
I think the threats were trying to manipulate my behaviour
to prevent you from talking.
Yeah, how serious they are, no way of knowing.
In your profession, there's a very small number of doctors who have become known around the globe for speaking out. You're one of them. Is there large numbers behind closed doors that are concerned?
Yes. I'm convinced there are. I'm retired. It's easy for me. Yeah. If you're an early career nurse, doctor, it's difficult to step out of line. It's difficult to say what you really suspect might be going on, because that could have career implications. And that's not just about COVID jabs. That's about the entire agenda that people are expected to comply with at the moment.
And people are concerned for their jobs, their families,
of course,
their futures,
of course,
their children's careers.
Of course.
You, where can people follow you?
Oh, YouTube. Type John Campbell in, you'll find my videos. Rumble as well.
Yep. Are you trying to share? Do you understand the level of censorship that's on this issue, and do you see a longevity in your presence on YouTube?
The reason that my videos appear a bit silly, Tommy, is that the artificial intelligence algorithms that monitor these things can't interpret. Are we on that camera?
Yep, you're on that camera.
Yeah, they can't interpret sarcastic looks over the camera.
Yeah. So you can make so on YouTube you can make comments, but then you'll to make it okay. So you're treading
we allow for viewer interpretation, Tommy.
Okay, to get around the level of the algorithm.
No. Just to allow for viewer interpretation.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant. Because I think it's very important that platforms such as Rumble we shift as many people over to them as possible to mainstream them, so that when people are looking for debate videos,
Rumble's great. It is genuinely
freedom of speech.
Yeah, it genuinely is. You can say things on there that you can't say on other.
Do you feel you've got free speech in the UK?
No. I am constantly self-censoring.
You haven't to, yeah.
You do.
Yeah. No, I think self-censorship, so whether they bring in laws or the public then become fearful and they self-censor.
And it's not just the COVID issue. It's a whole range of issues that basically I don't even feel free to list them now.
Okay.
But there's a whole range of issues that are not allowed to be discussed publicly, especially if you work in national institutions. So if you work in the health service, if you work in academia, there's a whole range of issues that basically aren't up for discussion, and that is not good for academic freedom.
Dr John Campbell, I've had a fascinating chat.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Good to meet you, mate.
Carry on watching for more interesting guests. I'll talk to anyone. I'll debate anyone. I'll hear anyone's story. If you want to help me along that way, it's not free. I need your support. If you can support my family, that gives me my peace of mind. It means I can continue to do the work I do. You can do so at www.supporttommy.com. I appreciate every bit of support, as do my children. Gives me the ability to fly them out here to see me so I can stay in constant contact with them. I'm deplatformed and I'm censored, so I need you. I need you to share this content. Make sure you stay tuned for upcoming weekly guests, interesting guests, exciting guests. I'm Tommy Robinson, and this has been my podcast, Silence.